effective.
All right, so we're live. Hey guys, welcome back to Critical African Thinkers. As you know, this is a place where we question everything, examine everything under the microscope of logic to ascertain what is most logical and factually correct. So today, I'm here with Stanley. We're going to be reviewing the debates that Glenn Lowry had with Shelby Steele. I think Glenn Lowry and Bob Woodson on one hand, and Camille Foster and Shelby Steele on the other hand. So where they were debating the ethics of black identity, whether or not it was necessary to invoke race um, in to further an agenda, whether we should move past race or whether we should, just take a hold of the racial narrative and try to reframe it because they one side of the argument believed that the left was framing the black narrative and that the right or the conservative black people needed to get into the reign and use race as well as a weapon or as a tactic to counter them. The other side of the argument says we should do away with race totally, that it's not useful, it doesn't have any usefulness in this regard. So Stanley and I are going to go through uh, some of the points raised in the conversation and see how we can make sense of it. Who had the stronger points? What do we agree with? What do we disagree with? I watched the debate the first time. That was about 3 weeks ago when it came out, and I rewatched it today. I think I got better clarity this time watching it, although my position did not really change from what it was the first time around. But let's see how it goes. So maybe as I get to talk with Stanley, maybe some things will change. So Stanley, what was your overall impression of the debates of the conversation between Glenn and Shelby?
Those two specifically.
Well, those two representing the two positions, broadly speaking.
Well, I think I see Glenn's point. You know, if I if I were a black conservative, and he pretty much stated it clearly. If the quote black left is going to use race as a weapon, essentially black conservatives, the people who signed the letter, should fight fire with fire. Basically, if they're going to use race as the race card, well, the black uh, conservatives should use the same weapon in kind.
Mm.
Shelby Steele, I just think he's just ridiculous. He seems to think we live in a post-racial America, and there's too much evidence to the contrary for me to. Honestly, I don't take his position seriously.
Okay.
I don't think he put up an argument. I don't think Camille Foster did either. Um, they are living in an America that I don't live in.
So now that I know where you stand on this issue, so I think I will take the opposite position to yours. So you're for Glenn, I will stay with
I'm
Camille
not for Glenn. I just
in
think
a in a
he's
in a
whiter.
broad
I
in
think
yeah,
he's.
yeah, in a broader sense. In a broader sense, you're more comfortable with the argument that Glenn was making than what Bob was making.
It makes sense in our present reality. Okay,
Mm.
if you're gonna be a black conservative, I would take Glenn's tack.
Okay. So I think one of the very first things they did when they started that conversation was trying to understand what exactly is the black identity? What constitutes a black identity? Now, in this climate where some people are labeled as not black enough for holding certain positions, to you, Stanley, what makes someone black? What is a black identity? What are the essential ingredients of being black?
Well, I think it's more or less cultural.
Could you expatiate on that when you say it's more or less cultural?
Well, I mean, black people. Let's just talk ADOS specifically.
Mm.
We have a shared history. Just like any other, group. Someone kind of said that, Black Americans like ADOS are basically an internal colony. And I think there's some flaws in that in that reasoning, but I think it's more or less true. We tend to live in the same neighborhoods. We tend to kind of vote for the same party. I think that, an internal colony is at least close to right. It's basically a shared history. It's a shared aesthetic, if that makes sense.
Mm. So it really has nothing to do with any ideological position. So you cannot be
Well,
stripped of your blackness, or can you?
I think it, I think it, I think you could break it down to an ideology. But then, I start getting into things that are intangible. I think Black people tend to have a very good idea of what is important. There's something called epigenetics, which I won't get into, but I think generationally, from it's kind of passed down from generation to generation. There's a certain people will call it conservatism. We look both ways before we cross the street, figuratively. We don't necessarily take everything at face value, because in our history, sometimes people you thought were your friends were not your friends. Um, so, there's a certain aesthetic, you know, kind of socially conservative. We don't take things at face value. I think that it'll come up in literature every now and again, or in certain types of sociology sort of settings. We tend to look at life a little bit more. Um, we tend to look at life less. Life is more than a transaction. Okay, life is more than going out and working 150 hours a week to make a whole bunch of money. There's a whole lot of you can't take it with you. Sort of an attitude in the Black community.
Okay, so if I get from the earliest part of what you were saying, if I get what you were saying correctly, is that Black people usually generally have a sense of what's important for the Black community. So my question would
Well,
be,
I think we have a sense of what's important in life.
oh, okay, so you have a sense of what's important in life. So what are the three most important things to Black America currently?
Depends on the Black American, but I think if you were going to paint a broad picture, I think that we understand that life is short, that life is dangerous, and that sometimes you don't have to always be so serious.
How does that translate into anything tangible? Okay, we understand that life is short, life is dangerous. You don't have to be so serious. Put it in very practicable terms.
I
How does
don't
that
think
translate
I don't
into
think you
how
can
Black
put
Americans live?
I don't think you can put a quote outlook on life or an aesthetic. Um, I think that I don't know. I'd probably have to think on it a minute or two. We laugh more. We probably find a lot of things funnier. I think that you know kind of traditionally we appreciate each other's company.
Okay, so that's a good one. Okay, so if we wanted to, if from a policy perspective, if Black America is to make a demand of the government from a policy perspective, what would be the three most important things? I think that was kind of where I was driving at.
You demands, and I'm probably more or less speaking for myself, but I think um, things like we need to deal with police reform. There was well, I won't get off on that aside, but things like police reform, I think, if you go and you look at statistics, it's probably more dangerous being a young black male than any other demographic. Um, I think for if you're poor and black in America, you are probably not as well off as a poor white person. That's generational wealth, that's income disparities,
Oh, wait,
etc.
wait, wait, wait. Okay, so let me hold you there now. How you said if you are a poor black person, you're not as well off as a poor white person.
Yep.
If a poor white person had generational wealth in the first place, how come they're poor? How does their generational wealth help them
Okay.
when they're still poor?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Okay.
I'm thinking of, say, you go and you look at, you know, like a bureau of, I can't even remember the name. It's not the, maybe it is the census. You go and you look at things like census data,
Mm,
where the average household wealth uh, in the U.S., black households are around $1,700 of household wealth
mhm.
versus like close to 100,000 or somewhere in that neighborhood for the average white family. That basically means that if you poor, on average, um, even if you go and you look at maybe something like education, a black college graduate is going to have less net worth than a white college graduate.
But you do know that there are a lot more white billionaires which can skew the white data. So
It
I don't
doesn't.
know
It
if,
doesn't matter. We're talking average.
well, the average, I don't think the average would reflect reality as
Okay.
much
Well,
as,
think about it, Charles. If there are a lot more black billionaires, there are a lot fewer black billionaires.
yeah, of course, of course. But let us compare economic class with economic class, because you made a statement that that's what I'm picking up on, that a poor white person, somehow essentially saying that a poor white person is still well off than a poor black person because of generational wealth. Now I find that almost contradictory, because if someone has generational wealth, let's take any two random people, one random
Well,
white person and one random black person,
okay. Well,
and
let me
both of them are poor.
clarify. Let me clarify my point. Looking at generational wealth disparities, and I'm basically doing an extrapolation. There are more poor black people per capita, if that's the right term, than
Mm,
there would be. Based on population, there's a higher percentage of poor black people than there are poor white people,
mm.
and they are going to be poorer. Black people are going to be poorer because of the generational wealth disparity.
Okay. We'll probably circle back to this
Uh,
position.
Basically, black people are poorer than white people. That's basically what it boils down to.
Black people are poor than white people,
More poor. They have
more
less
poor than.
generational wealth as a group.
But what do you define as poverty in America, and what percentage of
Whatever.
black people fall it?
There's a poverty line. I want to say it's right around $25,000 for like a family of four. I'd have to look it up, but there is such a thing in the U.S. We consider a family of four that makes less than a certain amount below the poverty line.
Okay. So I think one other thing that both sides touched on, um, was about who really speaks for black people. Are there what you would call black leaders? Because the debate arose from somewhat an attack on Clarence Thomas, and then black conservatives trying to come together to defend him and saying these people do not speak for black people. Now it's debatable if the conservatives are saying the other side doesn't speak for black people, the other side can very well say you do not speak for black people. So who speaks for black people? Who are the black leaders that objectively black people should listen to in America and say, okay, these reflect more so the realities of the generality of black Americans today?
Well, it's funny. I asked Fred about this about probably several months ago because my contention is that it's really more regional. Most black people tend to live in the traditional South, say from Texas over to Georgia and Florida, and then you'll have urban areas in the North like New York City, Chicago, um, uh, Los Angeles, I guess. I don't think there is one person who speaks for everybody. I don't think conservatives speak for everybody. I don't think uh, um, the Congressional Black Caucus on the left speaks for everybody. It tends to be very regional.
So when we're talking about poverty and income statistics just now, we're talking about, okay, on an average basis, we're talking about on a per capita basis. So let us apply that same formula in here and say, so which of these groups reflects to the closest approximation what the generality of the pulse of the generality of African Americans?
What are you going to list some? Or are you
Well,
asking me?
yeah, I'm asking you. I'm asking you.
I would say, whatever middle class is. I mean, it's
So
just it's just like any other population group. I think that, and again, I don't recall the numbers, but there is a black middle class, and that would pretty much comprise the majority of the ADOS specific population. Yeah, people, it's kind of a middle class.
mm, okay.
Does that make sense?
So Shelby Steele was making the art. It does if yes, of course, the middle class. But my question more was not really to the people per se. My question was more to the leaders. Which of these quote and unquote groups of leaders reflect on a broad basis
Oh,
the
you
pulse
mean
of
like
African Americans?
black conservatives versus black?
Yes, yes.
Um, well, I would say because that's hard to say. I don't look at it that way because, you know, when they say black people are conservative, kind of culturally conservative, um, they don't mean politically conservative. They mean like socially conservative. So I the problem is that I think black people straddle both sides. Um, when Glenn or Shelby Steele's a better example. When Shelby Steele says that racism isn't a problem in the United States, black people would go, "What?" Now, when Glenn says that, hey, we need to do better as far as, two-parent households and all that stuff, black people would nod their heads and go, "Yeah, you're right." But they would think Shelby Steele's just like, what they would literally ask, which country do you live in? Now you go look at the left. Um, you would say, what comes to mind is last year, or maybe it was even a little bit longer than that. George Floyd, right about the time, right around that summer, um, a lot of people would go, yeah, Black Lives Matter is right. There is a problem with police just kind of getting away with a lot more than they should. However, when that picture of Nancy Pelosi and some other congressmen, and I think there were one or two, um, you know, black congressional caucus members kneeling with kente cloth around, um, I, as a black person, thought, well, did Nancy Pelosi actually get with black people and go, hey, this looks ridiculous? I'm thinking, what was Jim Clyburn thinking? Who went, hey, y'all don't do this? It just looks silly. So, I think black people, basically straddle the fence. You can go too far either side. White people kneeling with kente cloth in honor of George Floyd is just silly. And Shelby Steele going, racism isn't a problem, is just silly.
Okay. So before we try and unpack what's that the claims that Shelby Steele is making, now you said something about I think I've forgotten that point. So let's just go straight to what okay let's go straight to what Shelby Steele said, which is that racism isn't a problem for black people today, right? So, to what extent is racism a problem for Black people? Because I remember a conversation that we had a while back where you said that racism today is more like speed bumps that you can get around it. So, isn't that sentiment closer to what Shelby Steele? Because Shelby
No,
Steele is not saying that there is no
no,
racism,
Shelby
but he's
Steele
he's
is
saying that racism is not it's not the most important problem
okay.
that Black people face in
That's
America
not
today.
what Shelby Steele said. And I literally wrote it down. Shelby Steele, and I'm quoting here,
Hmm.
racism is not a problem. He literally says that in those words.
Okay, so racism is not a problem, but that doesn't undermine the fact that there is still racism because he said that he is not denying the fact that there is still racism, but that
Okay.
racism is not a problem.
Tell that to, there's a cop today, a former police officer, who just got convicted of manslaughter of a young black woman. Okay. Tell that, tell, tell the mother of that young lady that racism is not a problem.
How do you go from a cop killing someone to
It's
him killing the
easy.
person because they are black?
It's easy. It is happening several times a year, is how
How
I go.
how do you connect that to racism? Cops kill people all the time, and they could kill people for a variety of reasons, right?
Dude,
So why
you know
why is
what?
it
Even if I'm guessing, it has been happening for a couple hundred years.
we're talking 2022, we're not talking.
Okay, I am talking 2022, I'm talking 1922, I'm talking 1822. Okay, there is a, even if I'm wrong, there is a pattern that has been established for over 200 years. Okay, you have George Floyd, you have this young lady, you have Tamir Rice, you have Ahmaud Arbery, and we're talking just in the last couple years. It happens too often, and there is a pattern. And you know what? I could be very wrong. It could be a very tenuous, I could even be flippant about it, but America has that history, and people are people, humans are humans, and you've got a population that has had too many people killed because of the callousness and just simply the recklessness of authorities. So yeah, you're right. In this particular incident, I'm kind of going out on a limb, but I've got 200 years of history at a minimum to back me up.
Mm,
I'm probably, I run the risk just as much of a, I could flip a coin. It's a 50-50 shot whether I'm right or whether I'm wrong. And those odds are too high.
See, I get what you're saying. I get where you're coming from, given the history. But when we automatically go to race and it isn't race, we run the risk of misdiagnosing the problem and not getting the accurate solution
But
to what the
Charles,
problem is.
Charles, I just said it's a 50-50 shot. Shelby Steele is running the same risk saying racism isn't a problem.
Yeah, of course, he's running the same risk, saying racism is not a problem, not that racism doesn't exist. Of course, these in a country as big as the United States with over 300 million people, you are bound to find these things. But how do you take these handful of incidents and say, oh,
Dude,
this is
you
this is a
go
this
back
is a
to Roland Fryer's study. He, in his study, statistically proven that black people are manhandled more often than any other racial group. Now, I know manhandling isn't murder, but the two are related. The police are statistically proven to treat black people more rough than other groups of people. Now, Roland Fryer is well respected in the black conservative community and the larger conservative community, and even his study finds a problem with police brutality to a specific group of people that happen to be black.
Yes. Okay. So that Roland Fryer study, I've read that study, or I've read a how will I call it, an article on that study, and yes, that highlighted the point that you're making now, because conservatives like to give the impression that what the Roland Fryer study just shows is that cops are not killing black people any more than they are killing white people. But they fail to also mention the fact that up until the point of pulling the trigger, that black people were treated much more roughly than white people or other racial groups. That
And,
is
and,
a problem.
and just that fact alone negates what Shelby Steele is saying. It is a problem, at least in that.
Well, well,
Dude, if they're treating one group of people consistently more rough than another group, and that group happens to be black, I don't know why they're doing it, but if I guessed racism, you couldn't prove me wrong. Who knows why the police are mistreating black people statistically rougher than other groups?
it may
But you
just
can't
have
say
something to do with
you
a stereotype.
okay.
It may just
Well,
have something to do with
but
the stereotype that if
okay,
they
but
think
what
black
is
people are much more
stereotype?
threatening.
Okay, then race is a problem. The stereotype is a racial stereotype. A race
Well,
race plus stereotype equals racism. Okay, and if it is statistically proven that black people are treated mishandled or manhandled more than any other type of group, it's a problem by definition. Would you agree?
of course, of course.
Okay,
And
and Shelby Steele is wrong.
okay, now, okay, let's speak statistically, because I'm seeing a comment there by free zone. Let's speak statistically and say what this guy is commenting, that saying statistically black people commit more crimes. So there's going to
Okay,
be
so
statistically more interactions between the police and say black people, and that in itself can lead to an unconscious bias, or it can lead to a stereotyping where black people are perceived to be much more dangerous.
okay, well
And
then
thus,
how does that justify the mistreatment though?
it doesn't. I'm just trying to understand how these things arise, and not just say that, oh, they're treated this way just because they're black.
But Charles, let me ask you a question. Trying to figure out why this is happening is a separate issue from admitting it is happening. Okay, we can figure out how to fix it, but the issue is it is occurring.
Mm.
Okay, and that black people statistically commit more crimes, that's unrelated to how they get treated. They're
But
two different issues.
how can that be unrelated? If I've been okay, let's say I'm a cop.
Okay,
Let's say I'm a cop, right? And I've been in the force for say 5 years. And in my interactions with criminal elements, I have found out that statistically speaking, most of these criminal elements are going to be of a particular racial group, right? Am I not primed, therefore, to be more suspicious or to be more on guard when I'm approaching a situation involving that racial group? Would I be out of place to be much more on guard? Because
you would be justified in being more on guard. Now, you tell me, how does being more on guard justify more violence? Are you saying because are you saying I'm justified in being more violent because I'm more on guard?
I think those things are in a natural progression of one another,
Okay,
right?
it
Because
sounds to me
I don't know what to expect from this person I'm
okay,
dealing
it
with.
sounds to me that you're saying police are justified because of stereotype and being more on guard
N-
to treating black
No,
people more rough.
no, 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 no. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying
Well, you're
instead of us
implying it.
instead of us just going to say that, oh, it's racism, that's why this is happening.
You know
Perhaps we
what?
could sit back and say, okay, maybe I'm not saying it's not racism. I'm just saying that saying it's racism just it stops every level of analysis as to why how we got there in the first place.
Right. But let me tell you how we got there in the first place. Go back to 1865, or actually the Emancipation Proclamation. But let's go back to 1865. That's how we got there. Okay, between 1865 and 2022, there is a history of violence in policing. And you know what? After 200 years of it, yeah, black people tend to make snap decisions and just automatically go to racism because there's been so much of it out there. Now,
No.
looking from the outside in, I can see your point. How can Stanley, how can you automatically go to racism? Well, Stanley, the ADOS dude who knows a little bit of history, you know what? It's as likely as not.
Mm. Okay, so I've let in El walk into this conversation. So El walk, welcome to the conversation. Please make your contributions. Uh, just stay on topic. Please don't. We don't want any foul comments or any of those. But you can go ahead. I guess you understand what I'm trying to say. So
Yes,
go ahead.
I've got you, Charles. By the way, I've listened to your channel many times. First time calling in, pleasure to speak with
Oh,
you.
good.
Thank you. And
Yeah.
Stanley, pleasure to join you in this conversation as well. I just wanted to chime in because I am also processing the conversation a couple of weeks ago on Black identity. And I think something that I didn't hear very well articulated in this conversation, and I remember it being a point of discussion in the original conversation with Glenn Loury and Shelby Steele, which is what is Black identity? And I think that where I've heard this conversation go is what is Black identity? And it's kind of this cultural thing. And then it shifts to, well, it's ADOS, whatever that is. I guess that's meaning Americans who are have descendants from slavery. And I totally get that. But then the conversation then goes to racism exists in criminal related situations, criminal justice, the so-called justice system. And so where I'm seeing that is that goes back to attaching black people to criminality, And so then we get caught in this loop of looking at how Black people are treated by police. No mention of the policeman's race. No mention of Black people who may choose or choose not to be police officers and how they
Okay,
choose to
let
interact.
me. Can
And
I
so and
hop
so
in
and
right
so just
quick?
just just so I can wrap this up really quickly, I think that we make a huge mistake when we're pointing at Shelby Steele, saying that he um, is entirely wrong to say that racism is not a problem. I don't think that he said that, and
No,
I
he.
dispute
That's a
that as
direct
well. But
quote.
I think the issue is that the problem is not that is not the biggest problem. I think that that is kind of what he was saying.
No,
Um,
I'm making a direct quote, and he said it
so
more. He
so
said
what's
it.
the quote?
If you go back and you look, he says it more than once. He literally says, and I'm quoting, "Race is not a problem today." He says it several times.
Right. He said, and what he said was, he said that today's problem is, for the biggest problem today for Black people is modernity, is freedom. And he
Okay,
is saying that we use race as a way to avoid responsibility, accountability, and what responsibility is necessary to
okay.
actually use freedom
Now
to our advantage as a collective. Now that's not
let
for
me
every
ask
individual, of
you
course, but that's
how that
just
is.
generally.
You know what? All that might be true. However, the one thing that is not true is that race is not a problem. He literally says it, and I'm disagreeing with it. I'm not misquoting him. I'm not paraphrasing. I The statement that race is not a problem is false.
So, can I ask a question? Um, outside of outside of the criminal justice system, um, where is race? Where is any individual Black person? Where does race prevent them from doing anything? I'm not saying that race doesn't become something that can be a obstacle to address or to work around, but where is that the problem where you cannot do something, Black person, because of your race?
Okay,
This is the thing that is going to keep you from
before
doing
we move
anything.
on to that, can you admit that race is a problem in the criminal justice system?
I can't admit that because I think that there's not enough. I think that we'd have to kind of go bring it back a little bit. So I think my concern would be, what parts of the criminal justice system are we talking about?
Okay, I
Uh,
just quoted or just referenced Roland Fryer's study from a few years ago, where it is statistically proven that Black people are statistically uh, uh, more manhandled than other groups.
yes, I heard you mention that, but
Okay, so I
you
don't
also
need to
started to
go
bring up
farther than
cop
that.
incidences
I
where Black
don't
people.
intend to go farther than that.
Okay,
Just based on that statistical fact, race is a problem.
okay. Now, I guess my question is it the biggest problem? And I think again, that's
Okay,
what
I didn't
Shelby
say
Steele was
biggest. I
referring
didn't
to.
say smallest. I'm not making that sort of point. My point is there is a problem. I don't know how big, don't know how small. That's kind of besides my point. My point is that there is a problem, and Shelby Steele is incorrect.
Mm. Okay. So let's talk about the other thing that Shelby still raised, which is he thinks that modernity is a problem for Black people. He thinks that Black people have not been able to handle the freedom that they've gotten. How do we make sense of that? What are your positions on that? Maybe El Walk will go first, then Stanley. Are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, so did you get my question?
I did. I think that, well, I don't agree with that either. I'm not even sure I understand what his point is. Because, I mean, if you go and you look at, crime rates or something like that, who specifically is he talking about? I mean, the majority of black people don't commit crimes.
So,
So I
but crime is not the sum and total of the black experience in
well,
America. There are other
yeah, and
aspects of
so
being black.
I think what he means is if we are still saying that racism is a problem, we're not dealing with modernity. I think that's what he's saying. If that's not it, then actually I'm not sure that what he says makes sense. I mean, we're living in modernity. Um, but I mean, if he's thinking that racism is not a problem, I guess what he's saying that if you think racism is a problem, and for him it's automatically a cop out or a crutch, maybe that's what he means. Like, we're acting like racism exists when it really doesn't, and we're acting like it does. And I think he's out to lunch on that one.
So I think what he's trying to say is that maybe some of the time, black people, instead of dealing with issues, or instead of facing the problems head on, or trying to find a solution to a problem, automatically default to racism. And in his mind, that isn't going to solve anything if you're just going to default to racism when you could look for more generative solutions to the problem.
Well, the thing is if race is a problem and you're ignoring it, then it remains a problem. Now, going back to what I said earlier about, reading race into everything, no, that's ridiculous. You'll be, stuck in one place forever. However, my position is you can't pretend that it's not there. It goes back to what I was saying. I mean, black people tend not to take everything at face value. Um, you know, don't automatically don't automatically default to racism, but don't count it out either.
Okay, so I think what you're saying is that because of the history, because black people are used to being treated in a certain way, because of their color of the skin, because of their race, when things happen, they're always suspicious, and they're always looking at it from the race angle first, saying this is no,
Well,
probably this is what this
well, let
is.
me say, let me put it a different way. We don't take it off the table. It may not be the first thing we reach for on the table, but we're not going to take it off the table.
But
And
I have a sense that it's if not the first thing, it's within the first three things that you reach for.
I think you would be wrong there.
can I jump in there?
Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
So thank you. So I think this is a great point, and I agree with you, Stan. I think that race is something that can and should be on the table. And Charles, like you're saying, it is usually one of the first few things that is reached for on that table. And I think that's where I believe it was Mr. Woodson who, in the interview, who mentioned that if black people take 1 year and talk internally about race and do not mention anything about white people, that is where we start, because what is going to happen is we will no longer be able to have any excuses. We won't have, I shouldn't say excuses, because things that involve race don't necessarily mean that they're an excuse, but it is something to address. But it doesn't allow us to address particular issues that we actually have some authority and autonomy over. And so, where we might look at the issue of modernity, going back to what Shelby Steele was saying, is that if our issue with modernity, if everything we look at in modernity that is a problem for black people, and we always put race on the table, we're never looking internally at what can we do to solve it. It always becomes some external problem where we lose as soon as we say it's something to do with race or something to do with white. We lose any ability to actually do anything about it. It just puts us in a loop where we end up asking white people to change how they feel about us or act towards us, and it leaves us without the creativity of seeing how Black people can address some of these issues. Because I think Stanley mentioned this before, not all Black people are criminals. That's 100% true. Not all Black people are in the same situation. But what ends up happening is when we use race, we end up making it so that it is the same thing that affects all Black people in the same way all the time. And it keeps us from having, as a part of the conversation, what has made some groups more successful, some classes of Black people, so to speak, more successful traditionally than others. And that's something that we need to be able to have those conversations, to use those strategies and to share those best practices rather than being isolated entirely as individuals, which was another part of that conversation. But
let me respond to that. And this is one thing that really annoys me about the Thomas Sowell crowd, which all four of them are basically acolytes. Okay, racism isn't a Black problem. Black people didn't invent racism in America. And I don't think, I find Black conservatives in particular want to place the burden for solving racism on Black people. Okay, ignoring racism is not a solution, and ignoring obvious racism is definitely not a solution.
where do liberals place it?
The racism problem is not Black people's problem.
So whose problem?
It's
I
white
think,
people.
okay, can I mention
Quite
something?
frankly,
Because I think that there was a really great metaphor that I think I heard John McWhorter use, and he basically
you
said,
know what? John
you get
McWhorter is
hit by a
even
truck,
worse than Shelby
you get hit
Steele.
by a truck. Whose problem is it for learning how to walk again?
Okay,
it's a hit and run.
racism isn't a
Somebody
truck.
hit you, but who's responsible
Racism,
for actually getting back up on your feet and standing up again? That
racism
becomes
isn't
the
an
problem of the
accident.
person who has been harmed.
It would be just like John McWhorter to compare racism to an accident.
Is there never such thing as, okay, you say racism, but let's not say, let's take your point that racism is something that happens amongst all peoples all around the world in different
You know
ways, in
what?
different
Now we're
forms.
doing
Sometimes it's more tribal, sometimes it's more
now.
ethnic groups. So now we're talking about something that's not unique, but
Okay,
now we can also look and see, okay, well, what has made what are the strategies that
let's
other
go.
groups, other ethnicities have used to overcome those things,
Okay,
as Black
I
people have in this country?
I
Because I think
don't
what
go in.
you're starting to pigeonhole Black people into being completely weakened and crippled and this and that's not who I am as an ADOS.
I
I do
don't
not come
go
from
in.
weakened, crippled, woe is me people.
Okay, number one, I disagree. That's what I'm doing. Number two, I'll go back. John McWhorter comparing racism to a truck to an accident would be just like John McWhorter.
Well, it
And
wasn't his comparison. I think he was
thirdly,
borrowing it from someone
and
else.
thirdly, I don't go in for the Thomas Sowell style internationalizing racism. I'm talking specifically about the United States at this particular time in this particular conversation. I don't care about the rest of the world. I
So
care
there's
about
no lessons to be
ADOS.
learned from anywhere
I
else in the
care
world. Is
about
that what you're saying?
ADOS, and I care about the United States. What is bringing up racism all over the world? How is that a solution? I think that's obvious.
Because it gives you an opportunity to look at some other groups of people and how they
Okay,
have overcome adversity that
what other
stems
group
from
of people
racism or
has
ethnic warfare.
what other group of people has ADOS's history?
I
Who are
think
we
every group
really?
of people in
Who
the
are
world
we
has
going
a
to
unique
compare?
history.
Who are we going to compare the Black experience in the United States to? in the rest of the world?
Sir, well, I think first of all, I think there's a lot of black people around the world who look at us and look at us with great esteem and respect. I mean, let's keep it real. If we look
Okay,
at
well,
black
let's
people
not
in
only.
America and look at our position in the world amongst
Okay,
other
let's
melanated
not.
black
Let's
people,
not.
we're
Let,
actually doing quite well because of how our ancestors have navigated these very trepidatious waters in this country. So
and
to
my
say that
point.
there's nothing to be learned from other people, I think that is what Shelby Steele is pointing to as saying black people have a problem with modernity. They're too busy looking at their own navels rather than looking around at some other strategies that other people can look at. And I'm not saying
Okay,
that
well,
to
let me
minimize what you're saying, but I am
let me
saying that
answer
it
that.
is an opportunity for us to look around,
Let
which
me
we
answer
don't
that.
do often enough to see what is going on elsewhere.
I think Shelby Steele is wrong. I think Shelby Steele needs to get out more. He is. I don't agree with your point, and I don't agree with Shelby Steele's point. I think I think the premise is wrong.
Is it
If black
possible?
people, if our problem in Shelby Steele's mind is we can't deal with modernity, my problem with Shelby Steele is he is just simply out to lunch and needs to get out amongst his people more.
Well, tell me this. Let's look at the groups in America that you say that um, black people are in competition with and
Well,
may
wait,
not
I
be
didn't mention
achieving as high
competition
as.
at all. I haven't
Okay,
talked
so
about other groups.
okay, but well, when you're mentioning that there's an issue of racism, there's inherently an issue of competition, and so therefore we are
No,
in
no, 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 no.
competition with
You're
other
taking
groups.
it way off base. You are totally changing the subject.
How am I
Okay.
changing the
I
subject? If
have
there's
not
if there is
mentioned
racism,
I have
there
not
is there
mentioned
are at least two
competition at
groups
all.
of races.
Competition has not come up. I talked about policing and I talked about racism. I said nothing about competition.
So what is racism then?
We're not even talking about what racism is.
Yes, but you're
Okay,
saying
I'm
that
not
racism
going
is the
back to
biggest
the
problem
basics.
with black
I'm
people.
not
You
going to
haven't
play
you
the
haven't
game.
adequately described
I
what
am
black people are.
simply,
You haven't
I am
described what
not going
racism
to
is.
play this game. We
I
all know what
simply want to know
racism
what
is.
definitions we're going off of.
You know what? I'm not going to play the definition game. We were talking about racism in policing and Shelby Steele. Okay.
You brought up racism in policing. Shelby
No,
Steele
we're
said
talking
racism is not the
Shelby
biggest problem.
Steele. The whole conversation that Shelby and the others had was about racism, was it not? Did they define it?
They actually did define racism a few
They
times in
did.
that
Then
conversation.
refresh my memory,
because
please.
because because racism is what a part of what racism is having to look at multiple races and what and how they either work together or work against each other in order to achieve or to be in a certain position of power.
Well, then
And so
maybe that's why Shelby Steele is getting it wrong. He's got what racism is wrong.
right,
Racism
that's
is
why I'm asking you, what is racism?
racism is not competition.
So what is it? Because it's not.
Okay.
You're telling me what it's not, but you haven't yet said what it is. And
I have
and
no
and
interest.
Charles, if I'm
I think
again, I think
I think
Stanley,
we
to your
all
point,
know
and
what
Charles, if
racism
I
is, sir.
apologize if I'm taking this conversation somewhere where
No, no, no,
it
you're
wasn't
fine.
intended
Yes,
to go.
it's
Dude,
okay.
I'm not getting into a definitional conversation. We know what racism is, and it's certainly not competition. And it certainly still exists. And it certainly is a problem. It may not be a
Yes.
big problem. It may be a speed bump, but the speed bump is there. The speed bump exists.
Is it possible for us to, as Black people, focusing back on where you're saying that racism is a big problem,
I
um,
know I didn't say
criminal
a big
justice.
problem. I
No, no,
said
no, a
a
problem,
problem.
and I would agree with you. It is a
It is
problem,
a
and
problem, not
it
a
is
big
a
problem,
problem. And I
not a
want to
small
focus in
problem.
on
It
one of
is
the
a
topics you
problem.
brought up because I think it's important in criminal justice racism is a problem. Now, in the realm of criminal justice in particular, I'm with you on that. Now, my question is, what can Black people as a whole, or maybe even Black Americans specifically, do to confront that problem and make things better for us, independent of of um, of any other group, or is it something that we
Well,
can't do independently?
that's a different show.
Okay, okay. So let me just follow up on this point that Elwok has said. So Elwok, if the racism is something that is done to Black people from the outside, why is it the responsibility of Black people to fix it? I mean, it's literally out of their hands. If the police are killing Black people because they're racist, what can Black people do about it? Short of police stop being racist.
Well, I'm not
Yeah,
even talking
yeah.
about
So
the
I would.
killings.
Oh,
I'm
was that
talking
on
about
you,
the.
Stanley, or was that me?
I'm sorry. I'm talking
No,
about the statistics,
no,
police
no.
brutality specifically.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just making a point. I'm trying to make Elwok give his point clearer, because he said that what can Black people do, you know, aside invoking other people when they are facing racism. So I am asking, is it up to, why should it be the responsibility of Black people if they are facing racism from an out group? There's really
Yeah,
nothing
yeah.
they can do if that group doesn't decide to stop being racist.
Yeah, totally understand that. And if I can respond to that, I don't think that it's possible to change how some other group of people feels about you or how they act towards you. I think that it is something that any group of people can do, is to how to respond to that. And so if the issue is, we have white police officers in a particular city, then the response might be, okay, well then it might be to our advantage to gain those positions of the police sergeant, or becoming the police, or policing our own neighborhoods and cities, and having the accountability be to someone who represents the community. I think that that's one area. I think another point would be, how what is causing a higher rate of policing to occur in a particular area, and very often it is uh, behavior that is um, that requires having a police officer show up to protect other people in the community. And so I think that that might also be, maybe not directly policing, but I do think that that would require other ways of enforcing discipline within the group. So that might be, how do people relate to them from each other from a family perspective? How do we talk to how do we allow children to talk to parents, talk to each other? I think that
What?
those sorts of things, that at one point in time, let's say the Black American church was very played a pivotal role in, as far as how to um, build the character of the community. I think that some of those things are ways that the community can police, starting just from a family perspective, policing character within the home. Mother, father, being together and addressing issues within the family. And then two, if you want to look at it and expand that a bit more, actually taking the reins of power in some of these cities that are majority Black, where the majority of voters are Black, and can actually elect Black people, and then allow those Black people to actually enforce the law. Because what I think can sometimes happen is that we can excuse criminals and excuse criminal behavior by saying that, well, the whole system is racist, and therefore when somebody is selling drugs, we should take pity on that person and not actually um, uh, give that hold that person accountable for what they've done. So those are just a few ways that I think could be beneficial, starting with just families and discipline, and then beyond that, actually having people that we place in power to actually be responsible for enforcing the laws to protect the citizens of that community.
Can I respond to that?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, number one, I if if we're going to be consistent with our argument, and I'm saying that police reform, police training, police behavior is the problem. It would technically be racist to expect a black policeman to act any better than a white policeman. And there are numbers out there. I can't think of a study off the top of my head. A lot of times it's black cops that are mistreating black criminals. Black cops can be can stereotype too. So I don't think black cops are going to be any better than white cops. I think cops in general need to be reformed. Um, I understand your point about, kids being raised better and fathers in the house and better households. Two things on that. That's a moral suasion argument, and I don't buy it. I mean, it is common sense that avoiding the police, avoiding criminal behavior, you won't have to deal with it at all. And that's something that I talk to my son about. Just it's not worth stealing candy or something like that and being involved if you don't have to. However, that doesn't excuse police misbehavior. Okay, a criminal is a criminal. Someone who is, for some reason or another stopped at a traffic stop or something like that. um you're gonna run into the police at some time in your life, whether it's a speeding ticket or whatever. Police need to act professionally. I don't buy moral suasion arguments, and it is not up to black people to solve American racism. We didn't invent it.
So should we then leave?
That's not my point. We should expect the cops to be professional, is what we should expect.
So I guess that goes back
And,
to what I
and
was
to
saying as the other
to
point, which is hiring or electing officials who can be in those positions to hold the police accountable, to
Okay,
actually
well, how does race
enforce
come into
training
that?
for the police if that is what is required.
Okay, well, you kind of alluded to the fact that more black people in positions of power would solve the problem. I reject that outright.
Yeah, I actually don't think that that has solved the problem, but that would take
Well, no,
the
it
issue of
would
it being
it
a
should have
race issue off
we
of the
should
table.
we shouldn't expect a black cop to act any better than a white cop. They are cops. They both receive the same training. They both work in the same department, etc. More black people in positions of power. I mean, that Bob Woodson actually addresses that. He's addressed that in the past. Once you get into positions of power, the black people act just like the white people, corrupt. And expecting better is racist right there, right there. Why would a
So,
black cop be any different than a white cop? It's racist
so,
to think so.
so let me follow up with a question, Stanley. So, from what you're saying now, it means that the black cop will treat black people just as shitty as the white cop. So,
I'm
isn't
saying,
this
well, no, what I'm saying is expecting him to.
no? You gave a scenario where you said that even most of these abuses are even done, or some of these abuses are done by black
That
cops
is true.
themselves.
And
Good.
my
Good.
point,
So isn't this a policing problem, a policing tactic problem, a policing
yes.
culture problem? How is it a racial problem? Because
Well,
if
no,
you
I'm saying it's
misdiagnose it as a racial problem,
no. I'm saying that expecting a white police officer to be any different than a white police officer is unreasonable. We can't expect that.
of course, I agree with you on that ground. But also looking at the realities, looking at what is happening currently, what is obtainable, the black cops are not any different from the white cops. So it couldn't possibly be because it is racism. That's why the cops are acting this way. It's simply
Well, no,
bad police culture.
let me clarify my point. The expectation is what I find problems with. I think in reality there might be a difference, but should I expect there to be a difference? If the solution to the problem of cops being racist, the solution isn't hire more black cops.
I agree. I agree on that regard.
So the solution is to ask the group that is racist to stop being racist.
I'm not sure I understand your question.
I mean, I guess I'm seeking a solution, because it seems that this is something to bring up because there's no solutions. Because if a black cop doesn't treat black people any better than a white cop might treat other white people, then is there something that is like, what is the reason if me just saying that, well, perhaps there might be a more filial connection between a black police officer and a black person, where they might receive better treatment. If me just bringing that up is racist,
well,
then
you said it. Well,
I made a suggestion about as far as just the leadership and the accountability.
Okay.
Because what I want to do is to pull away. I'm sorry, I'm going to let you finish. What I'm going to try to do is say, okay, how can we make it so that the doesn't become race, but the issue.
You still there?
Stanley, go ahead.
Well, I hate. Let me give him a second to come back because I want to answer him directly.
Okay, that's fine. So, my question would be, I think policing is bad. I think the way police go about their business is really, really bad, and I try to look at it from that perspective.
Well, the thing is his question was, we can't make or we can't expect better behavior, and I disagree with that. I think part of the problem, it's kind of a complicated and a long-winded statement, but part of the problem is expectations. Up till now, police unions and cops have gotten deferential treatment for decades. So, it's a culture issue. And I think that, everyone, all the police, regardless of race, get trained the same way. They all have, kind of the same power. Now, I don't expect a black cop to treat a black person better, but practically, yeah, if they come from the same background or the same network or same neighborhood, yes, it is very possible that black cop may treat a black suspect better than a white cop. All I'm saying is we can't expect it, and we can't administrate that way. Okay. If the solution is not voters elect more black cops or more black police chiefs, we can't expect a better outcome based on race. What a better outcome is the expectation of how police are trained, their professionalism, everything except for race is what we should be doing. Now, we're not going to get rid of racism. It'll never be 100% perfect. What we can do is do better in hiring. We can do better in training. We can do better in discipline.
But Stanley, you see that you've just provided a workable solution without race in it, without even invoking race, without considering race.
Okay, well,
You've
that's
you
my point. We can't race racism is a problem. Race is not.
And sorry, I dropped off there, but I did hear your response there, Stanley. And
Yeah, I
something
mean, the
that you
race
mentioned.
of the cop doesn't matter. It's the racism. It's the behavior.
Well, but you brought up something that's really important, and I think that is really the crux of this whole conversation, which is the expectation. I mean, we've been talking for an hour here about the racism and around the around criminal justice, and that was the first idea of racism that you brought up was around crime and criminal justice. And I think that in and of itself, associating black people with crime, I think that is a huge expectation that is a part of you know the line of American history. And I think that is a part of the reason why, like you said, we might have black cops who might treat black people the same way as white cops treat white people. And
But you
maybe it comes
said it.
from a certain
You
set of
said it
expectations.
exactly.
And
We
so
might.
if we, because then it becomes, well, is the issue being expectation something that we can then take
Okay,
and
well,
move,
hold
pivot
on one
from
second.
criminal justice and pivot to education or pivot to some other realm, because then the issue is a little bit less of racism and it's more of
Okay,
expectation that even black people have for black people, as evidenced
let
by
me
a black person bringing up race being a problem immediately, starting with crime,
let
and then
me
saying that the
clarify
solution can't of having more black people involved in that, to even
that.
bring up that so as a solution is racist, because
Okay,
black people's
no, you
expectation would
didn't
be
understand my
to be
point at
something
all.
different.
You said that might be a solution. Well, it might be. However, as a formal as a formal problem solving sort of solution, hiring more black cops is not a solution. It might work, but it might not. And we can't depend on might. What we can depend on is better training and more accountability.
So what say you about the cities, for instance, Baltimore, um, where there are black people, black citizens who aren't criminals, who now for the last several years there's been fewer and fewer cops, and one of the biggest issues that came up, you know, almost 10 years ago was a major issue of police brutality.
Okay, well,
And then
if you
you have law-abiding citizens who are looking for police, who need police, to the point where black men in the city have just started to basically organize community policing groups, walking out with no um, protection, no arms or anything, just to be a presence, because the there's a stigma now for police. There's fewer police than can actually patrol the city because of a decade of people saying how racist the police are, and I think that there was a lot of that and still is.
okay,
But
well,
then,
were they
what
saying it?
happens for the people that are there who are looking for, look, they're basically saying, I don't care how the police handle somebody. I need people to stop shooting in front of my house.
That's not
And
how it's happening at all. You bring up Baltimore. Um, do you remember the Freddie Gray situation? It's about 10 years ago,
yes,
maybe.
I lived right around the
Okay,
corner from
good.
where that happened.
Several of those cops were black, were they not?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
And
so
so so then
my
is the
point,
issue race, or is the issue, like you said, was that just poor policing?
it's poor policing, and we can't depend on black cops being any better behaved than white cops.
And so,
That's
can I
the
point to one other thing that happened in that time was the hiring of the I think it's the state's attorney, who basically went to really, in that particular situation, to really focus on disciplining those police and trying to institute reforms across the city. And what has happened is the crime has only gotten worse for the last several years since then. And I
Okay,
know this
so
is a very
what's your
specific
point?
issue. Pardon me.
What's your point? She shouldn't have tried to reform?
My point is that the reform of saying that that we need fewer police was the problem, and one of the areas of possible reform would be in other realms where it relates to family,
Okay,
to
I don't
just
agree
how
with
the
any
community
no.
can participate. You say you don't agree with that.
Okay,
My
okay,
question would be:
my point
look at
is
who's in
that
prison,
if
and look
if
at
her
and ask how many of
solution,
those men, white, black, or another, have come from a two-parent household. I
okay,
know you don't want to talk about moral issues, but
you're
that is a part
conflating
of it.
the issue. Okay, you went from attempts to police reform to the quality of a family. That I don't even understand how you got from point A to point B.
I guess I'm
Okay,
focusing more on the
if the
on the idea of
prosecutors,
discipline
if
before it
if
has to get to a
if
state
the
enforcing
reform,
discipline.
if the reform, the attempted reform didn't work, okay, try another reform.
Right. That's what I'm saying is the reform may not necessarily
Okay, and the
be at the
reform,
police level. Once it gets
okay,
to the area of policing, it's
the
already too late.
reform for
That's what I was taught.
okay, how can the reform for police misbehavior be better families? How is that a solution? How are they connected? How is
How are
police
how are they
reform
connected?
how is
How
police reform connected to a better quality of family?
okay? How is police reform connected? One, I would say they're not directly connected. I'll start
And
there.
that's my
Okay.
point.
I'll start there. Now, we're still stuck on the same point of where I guess race is the only, criminal justice
No,
is the
let's
only area where race is a problem, and it is. But reason why I brought up family was because I want to see, okay, if trying to reform the police, if that is a fool's errand, then maybe
no, no,
there's
no,
another
no. I didn't
area
say it was a
where
fool's
black
errand.
people can I'm not saying, okay, what I'm saying is if we can look at evidence of seeing where, okay, we go from having police reform, body cameras, that doesn't make a difference.
Okay,
Adding
well
black
then
people
try
as
another
police
reform
doesn't
is
make a
my point.
difference. So my
Try
question is,
another reform.
how can we
The
reduce the amount
family
of incidences
fixing
where
a
people are interacting with police? And I think a
okay,
part of that
no,
is how people from a young age are socialized in the home
okay,
that
I'm
can
sorry. I
reduce the
don't
amount of
see
times where police are
I don't
involved.
see better families being police reform.
And I guess for that, I would say when we look at at people who are actually incarcerated, and we look at what type of families they come from, I think the pattern is that they are coming from broken families. And so I'm not
Okay,
saying
so
that,
you're
again, these are
basically
still
saying
two very different things. But if we're looking at what black people can focus on without having to rely on any other group, that is
no,
one area where
black people
I'm looking for something that we can
black
actually do.
people
And you're
must
looking.
demand that police get better.
Okay, so we've been doing that for 10
That has
years.
nothing to
Do
do
we need
with
another
an
10
if
years? Do we need
what
another
we
50 years?
if what we have done, you're blaming black families because police reform hasn't worked.
Do you not think that black families not having a actual family structure isn't a part of some of the instances and reasons why we have so many young black people
Okay,
incarcerated?
you're
I'm
conflating the
just looking for
issue.
what the
We're
pattern
talking
is.
about policing, not incarceration. They're two different things.
Okay, so
Okay.
let me jump right in here. I think um on a philosophical level, I think I kind of agree with Stanley or what Stanley is saying because these are two different things and they can meet at a certain point, but they are not totally related or they're not codependent on each other. For example, the bad behavior of the police it's going to be there irrespective of how the kids are raised, right? So whether you raise good kids, whether you raise bad kids, police shouldn't be they shouldn't be bad because they are bad families. They should be good policing practice. They should, of course, they should arrest the criminals, but but acting in a certain way that is very, very unprofessional. The solution to that is not raising good kids. It's not raising good families, because that is not a family problem. That is a policing problem. But where I diverge with Stanley is that even though he's agreed that that is a policing problem, he still sees that as racism. That is my contention with Stanley.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm only pointing at is, yes, racism is a problem. I agree with you on that. And what I'm looking to address, and I don't know if Stanley's still on with us, but I'm just simply saying, okay, where can Black people be effective and autonomous in how if we have any point where there's a difference that we can make independent of someone else, and ask, and maybe that isn't the thing.
Okay, are you asking? Are you
But
asking
but
how
but, but I
black? Are
But
you asking?
think
I'm sorry. Charles
I
asked a
think
question.
I
I
think
apologize.
I think black people can do that, and at the same time demand for the police to be better. I mean, one doesn't have to wait for the other. You can
Right,
raise
and
good families and demand that the police be better, and you can keep demanding for as long as they say the greatest room in the world is the room for improvement. So as long as there's a room for improvement, then there should also be a room for demanding that they do better.
but I mean, I think that working for better black families is a good in and of itself. If the police were perfect, we should still be working for better black families.
I would agree.
However, it is not up to black people to fix racism.
Now, now, Stanley, you mentioned earlier that I think you mentioned this. If I'm wrong about that, I apologize. But most Black people, obviously, are not criminals or involved in the criminal justice system, obviously. And so, if the criminal justice system is the place where we might find the most racism, and that criminal justice system touches a relatively smaller percentage of the Black community, but that's the area where we see the majority of racism really being an issue.
Well, let's just
Is
say it's
racism
the
still
most.
a? Oh, go ahead.
Let's say it's the most visible, the most
Most visible.
obvious.
Okay, okay. And is that does that require? Is that where where Black people should spend most of their focus and energy, or is there room for us to kind of adjust from, let's say, um, having it be almost de facto that when a candidate comes out and they're trying to cater to the Black community, one of the first, if they're saying three policy areas, one of the first three is always criminal justice reform. And is there something else where maybe Black people in America can pivot to, so that our candidates aren't immediately connecting Black people with crime as if it's something that everybody who is Black is involved in? Because I've started to come to a point where that, to me, I receive that as a practice of racism, to just on a political level, equating Black people with crime, when that's not who I am. I do know people who are involved in that, and I think that they should be held accountable. But I just don't think that that's, broadly speaking, the first thing or the second thing or the third thing or the fourth or fifth thing that is going to help lift Black people, or provide a better quality of life for most Black people.
Education.
100%. I'm in
Which
agreement
in
with you
in
on that.
my opinion might be more important than crime. The reason crime comes up a lot is the majority, a great number of black males are incarcerated, so it's a problem. But I think, education is, something we can pivot to. And I think that's covered a lot by politicians. But one interesting thing about politics, um, we think a lot about Congress and the president and all this stuff. You Someone brought it up in a totally different context. Local politics is probably the most important thing Black people can concentrate on because it affects us directly. What your congressman does, yeah, of course it affects you, but what your mayor does or what your police chief does, that's day to day practically.
Mm-hmm.
What your school board does. The local politics are probably the most important.
Now, is there, and I think that that's somewhere where there can be racism, and I think that to that effect, there's to see that as adversity rather than a barrier that cannot be.
Well, I'll
That we
tell
can't get
you,
over. I think that
you think about public schools, um, you know, um, because public schools, tend to be funded, by local taxes. You'll have a school in a Black neighborhood not be the same quality as a school in a white neighborhood. Okay, how much more obvious, can that be? The white neighborhood has a bigger tax base because they tend to be richer versus a poorer Black neighborhood. There's a huge disparity in,
yes,
a quote Black school versus a quote white school. It's documented, and there are reasons for that. Tax base.
mm-hmm.
My question is, how do we fund schools in a way that the opportunities are relatively even? You'll never get perfect parity, but why are Black schools not as successful as white schools?
I think
Um,
it depends on the school and
okay, well, that's my point. It depends on the school, and Black
the
schools.
expectations. To go back to something that you brought up
No, it's
earlier.
funding.
Well, I think funding is a part of it. I'm definitely an advocate of school vouchers and alternative
Okay, well, see,
schooling
I think
processes.
it's a
But
different show, but school vouchers are a cop out. Let's make our public schools better.
yes, I think that yes, but I also don't think that that public schools are something that we should rely on and to ignore the opportunities for school vouchers. Now, I don't think that school vouchers are the be all end all because that doesn't
I
necessarily
don't
mean
think.
that a voucher will be used at a school that is going to be lead to success for any particular child. But I do think it provides far more opportunities and options
Okay,
than
well,
if it's a local neighborhood school.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say the whole idea of school vouchers is racist. I'll just go ahead
I
and go out on that limb.
Yeah,
Make
man. I
black
think
schools, make Black public schools equal to white public schools instead of school vouchers.
right, but I think that part of that equality, again, I think, and you're not going to like this, but I do think that part of it comes back to what happens at home once the children leave a school, and what is the
I
practice at
thoroughly
home.
disagree.
Because and if I would just say this, because even if you take Black children at a white school, and we look at the numbers of hours spent on homework and on studying, the a lot of the achievement is based on how many hours a child of any background is focused on studying and on focusing on getting on achievement.
Okay, so
And
you're
a lot of that
blaming.
has to do with how Did the parents go to university? Are the parents at home when the child is home? That is a part of it. So just
Okay,
being at a black student in a white school doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to
so
be better off or
you're
better equipped.
blaming you're connecting family quality with school quality and saying there's a one-to-one correlation.
Yes, I think that
Okay,
families
I think
have
that
it. I think that okay. I know you think that's racist, but
well,
I'm
no,
going to say that I do think
I
that
don't even think it's
families play a
racist.
huge role in
Okay,
how their children use their free time.
okay, again, you are connecting two things that shouldn't be.
Yeah,
Family
responsibility
quality,
and outcome.
family quality should not be connected to school quality. Okay, a bad family does not excuse a bad school.
What I would say to that is family quality and a there's a bad school. Okay, am I going to, as the father, keep my children in a bad school, or am I going to find another option? Whether that means
I'm
is
saying
moving, bringing my child home
no,
for
you're
homeschooling, or
connecting.
going somewhere else.
You're not understanding my point. There should be no bad schools. They should all be good. Black, white, regardless of neighborhood, regardless of family structure.
I don't know if that's. I think that depends on what the point of the school is. I mean, if the point of the school
The
is
point
to
of a
get children
school is a
ready
good
for the
education.
local jobs at a particular area, I think that the school is going to be catering or should cater to what is available as far as what the broader community might need in an
Okay,
area. And so, not all schools are going to be exactly the same.
okay, I'm not asking for schools to be the same. I'm asking them to all give good educations. If there's a sameness, they should all offer quality educations.
Yes,
Okay,
and oh, go ahead. Sorry,
sorry.
Charles.
So let me just interject before we continue. So Imam Alfred, please, you want to call in? The link is in the chat. You can just click the link I put in the chat to call in. So I've always heard this point. I think conservatives use it a lot that oh, most of these kids are coming from homes where they're not good homes, broken homes, and all that. So to Stanley's point, shouldn't the school be there to teach in the first place? Shouldn't the school teach irrespective of where the kids are coming from? Shouldn't the school be able to? Why should it also fall down to the responsibility of parents to teach the kids if the schools are there in the first place? So that the home front can be of a secondary concern, but the primary concern is what exactly is the school doing in the first place? What kind
Well,
of education are they churning out? What kind of curriculum? What kind of teachers do they have? What's the environment? Is it conducive for learning? What are the equipment? If those things are not there, then I think it's kind of a cop out to just say, "Oh, these kids are not doing well because they are coming from broken families."
well, I wouldn't say that that is the case, but I think that we're just disagreeing on the philosophy of where education should take place. I don't believe that that education should be outsourced to a school. I think that that begins in the home, and whether or not the people in the home choose to educate their children in the home or choose to send them somewhere else, be it public or private school, um, I think that that is where we're going to have a little bit of a disagreement, or just I should say disagreement, but just not kind of see where or what the purpose of an education is, just on the fundamental basis.
Okay,
So,
But
what,
if it,
what sort of education should the kids be getting at home? What sort of
I think
education?
that I think that at home, children should be getting the cultural education, the religious education, and also the moral education that's required. And then those things inform what a child will be equipping themselves to do for a profession in the future. And so, if that profession is going to be taking on the family business, then depends on what the family business is.
Okay, I see your point. All right, Stanley.
I'm thoroughly confused with that. What if the what if the parents don't have like a high school diploma? You know, moral, cultural. Yeah, I agree that should be done at home, but what does that have to do with the school? What does that have to do with reading, writing, and arithmetic?
All of
Because
those things should be done
we
before a
don't
child
all
goes to
come
school.
from the same religion. We don't all come from the same culture. And, morality can even be relative. Schools aren't there to do that.
They're not,
Schools are not
because
there
I
to
think
give
very broadly that's
schools,
one of the biggest
public
debates in the
schools
country
are
right
not
now is
there to give
schools
religious.
giving kids a type of morality, a
Okay,
type of
schools are
theology.
not there. Morality, you said it, should be taught at home. I mean, the basics like don't kill your classmates, that's obvious. Okay, but religion, morality, and culture, um,
And
schools
reading
are
and writing
there
and
for
arithmetic
reading,
should be taught
writing,
at
and
home.
arithmetic, and
Part of that
a
is
little
homework.
bit of the other stuff.
Part of that is homework. But I don't disagree with you that there are poor schools that are not equipped to do that have a poor moral framework in and of
Okay,
themselves.
schools should not have a moral framework.
I guess I'm talking about how the teachers even relate to the children, or even how the administration um, might keep might even keep their books and things. I mean,
But see,
there's
that's my point. There
yeah.
I,
should
So
be no differences.
I think that the schools should just teach, what they're there to teach. They shouldn't be the ones in charge of teaching morality or teaching a certain moral worldview because, like Stanley said, different people have their different moral values. So it
But
shouldn't be the
right.
case of the school.
the crux of my argument is that the racism comes in where a school in a poor black neighborhood is not as well funded because
But
of the tax base.
Stanley, I hear that some of these schools that are doing really badly are actually very well funded, and that at times that
That's
the
not
performance of the students is inversely proportional to the funding that they receive. That it's not really a funding issue. That some of these schools
it's a
are
funding
getting good
issue.
funding, and yet the students are not.
The way public schools are funded is by tax base. So a richer neighborhood or a richer city is going to have more funds for teachers and facilities, etc., than a poor neighborhood or poor city.
Do the
There
parents have
there
any
will be.
responsibility in that?
I'm sorry.
Do the should the parents have any responsibility in where they're living and or where they can go as far as providing for their child, or should they just
Maybe,
rely entirely on the state?
maybe not, but that has nothing to do with the quality of the school. You can't blame the family situation or finances. You can't. That should have nothing to do with the quality of the school.
But I think it depends on what the school is set up to do. I mean, or
The
if the
school should
school
be set up to educate.
educate what? I mean, again, it's reading, writing, and
Reading,
arithmetic.
writing, arithmetic.
But and I would go back to saying all of those things can and should be taught at home,
I
and that
disagree.
and part of that depends on the quality or the
No.
ability of the parents or the people around a particular child
Okay.
to influence or to be a part of the teaching in that
I
process,
don't
including
expect
things as basic as homework. Because you can send a child to
that.
a poor school who does their schoolwork, their homework religiously for 2 hours a day, and they
Okay.
will have a better outcome than a child who goes to a white
I'm
school
not
who
talking
doesn't
about
do that at all.
outcomes. I'm talking about the quality of education. You can go to a great school and not do your homework. That has nothing to do with the quality of the school.
But is there something as far as the quality of the students as well?
You know what? The quality of the students has nothing to do with the quality of the school. If you have good teachers and you have good facilities, you're right. It's up to the parent to motivate the student. Okay, but that's independent of the quality of the school.
Well,
A
that's
good
that's
school,
the
a good
So
expectation.
school.
my question would be, how much of the performance of the student is due to the quality of the school versus the quality of the home? Because I think both contribute to the outcomes. So how much of that contribute is each contributing?
Well, they're both important.
Yeah, and I think that at home is where the values of education, the values of achievement, the values of hard work are taught at home. They're
I
not taught
agree.
at school.
A
And
school
so and
should
so,
not be a school
right,
shouldn't be teaching that stuff. That stuff is on the parent.
right. But that's what I'm saying is there's still a level, there's still layers and fundamental basis of morality that's taught at home. That's a part of what the parent is instilling in their child, and is a part of what the parent is choosing to even have their child around or observing, be it on their free time or at their school. Um,
But it has
or
nothing to do with the quality of the school.
it
Has
does
nothing
have
to do
something
with
to
the
do.
quality of the teachers, has nothing to do with the quality of the textbooks, has nothing to do with the quality of the gym or other facilities.
Look, if a child's parents don't show up to a parent teacher conference and they have no idea what's going on at the school, that does make a difference. If a
Okay,
child
it
is
has
going home
nothing
and
to do with
they're
the
going home
quality of the
to an empty
textbooks,
house that nobody is
whether
checking their homework, that does have something, that does
whether
make
a
a difference.
parent shows up or whether a parent makes sure that homework is done has nothing to do with the quality of the textbooks, has nothing to do with the quality of the gym, has nothing to do with the quality of the teachers.
You can send your kids to a school with a great gym and they still have a bad education
That's not
because
the
they're
school.
not going home and they're not being taught to go home and study and to work,
Has
especially if their
nothing to
parents
do
are
with the
not involved in the
quality of the
process.
textbooks, has nothing to do with the quality of the teachers, has nothing to do with the quality of the gym.
What does it have to do with that?
Okay, Stanley. So if you have a situation where the home front is settled, the home front is taken care of, are you saying that um, the outcome is now dependent on the school, or are you saying in most cases the outcome of the African American kid is is more the quality of the school than what is happening in the home front? Because I believe that the home front is just as important, right? So which is more important?
I think they're equally important.
They are equally important. So which of them, if you want to look at the actual outcome of African American kids, there are cases where they say some of them can't even read at K to 12 level or and all that. So are you saying that it's the quality of the school that is most responsible for that? Because if the home front is good, if I'm a parent, my home front is good, and my kids cannot read at a certain grade level when they should be able to read at that level, then they pass that grade level without being able to read. I think that reflects a lot on the parents as well, whether or not the school is good. Are you there, Stanley? I can't hear you if you're saying anything.
Hey Charles, this is L Walk. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hey, I got to drop off from the conversation.
Oh,
Thank you
okay,
for letting me
okay.
call in. Appreciate
Yeah.
talking with you and with Stanley.
Thanks for calling in too. I appreciate your conversation and your contribution. Hope to
Hey,
see
I
you next
appreciate
time.
you. Yes,
All right.
indeed. Take care.
Yeah, thank you. Bye. Stanley, are you still there? Something happened to your mic, Stanley. Hello, AD. AD says you're Sicilian of Sicilian Arabic descent. That's a unique combination. Good. Welcome to the conversation. So we started this conversation analyzing the debate that Glenn Lowry had with Bob Woodson, Kemel Foster, and Shelby Steele on the ethics of Black identity. What is Black identity? Should it even be important at all in formulating certain policy positions? And from there, we pivoted to other areas. We talked about racism, whether racism is the most important problem facing African Americans today, or whether it is a problem at all. Shelby Seals seems to think that racism isn't a problem. Stanley takes a contrary position. Stanley believes that racism is a problem. Well, how much of a problem it is, he hasn't told us. He said he doesn't know how much of a problem it is, but definitely is a problem. For me, I think racism is something that you can't. I don't think we would ever be able to get rid of as a species. I think we can bring it to a bare minimum. But my problem is when negative interactions between two races is there's this default to saying it's racism without considering other factors that may be responsible for why such a thing is happening. Like what happened to George Floyd. I mean, the default narrative was um, Chauvin was a racist cop who was just looking for a black person to kill. What I saw in that footage was a bad cop who was in a power trip. I mean, a bad cop who obviously did something bad, did something wrong, did something unprofessional. Well, if we look at it from the racial angle, how do we solve that problem? How, if we are misdiagnosing the problem, then we cannot prefer an accurate solution to the problem. And that's the issue I have with essentializing race, of making race the forefront of any problem, just saying that, oh, this is racism, this is racism. So I don't know if Stanley is going to come back, but I think we've covered quite a lot on the conversation today, and maybe this would be a good place to stop the conversation. So if you're just joining, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel, and I will catch you in another live stream. So it's bye for now, I guess.